what she said. She's magical, mystical, a powerful wonder girl.
Joining us now is What She Said relationship expert Tara Antler. Welcome back to the show,
Thank
Tara.
you so much.
And today we're going to talk about how to confront conflict with compassion, which I think is probably a stretch for a lot of us.
Yeah, because what happens, the difference between compassion and conflict, compassion expands us. Conflict constricts us. If you even think about how you feel when you're in conflict, everything tightens, your breath shortens, you feel sick in your stomach, some people's chest actually hurts. And when there's that constriction, your blood vessels actually constrict and you can't get to the solution. You can't get to the clarity of what you really want to express. So what happens most of the time is we blow up, all the stuff from our past begins to surge forward, and then we're just blowing off at each other, and it doesn't create any resolution, and the person actually can't hear us fully the way we want to be heard when we're blasting off like that. Whereas compassion, if you can get yourself back to a space of compassion, everything opens, your heart opens again, your communication center opens, you relax. It's like being in a yoga or meditation class. You just, and then all of a sudden the clarity comes. What you need to say comes with much more consideration than just blasting off at somebody else, because conflict just creates more conflict. It never resolves.
So what are the steps that you recommend if there is a conflict, before you open your mouth, before you react, probably something's welling up inside you, but what do you say?
I always say you got to take a timeout, just like we do for kids. When you see kids kind of losing their cool, you give them a little timeout. Adults need that too, because what's happening in that moment, we're being triggered by something. Something's upset us, something's triggered us, something's upset something. Not necessarily, it seems like it's in the current moment, but it's usually connected to our past. So there's some framework, some belief system, something that happened maybe 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that literally is being called forward, and it's stirring up all these emotions. It's stirring up all this stuff within us, and quickly we're like a volcano and blasting off. So we actually have to cool down for a second. We have to give ourselves a timeout, and it's actually the inner child that's been hurt and wounded from the past that's feeling that pain. And that's why it's so visceral. It's so tangible. It's there. And so the first thing is we have to give ourselves a timeout. We have to pause and take a deep breath, because going into the conflict right away, again, we're just going to spew off all this hurt. We're probably going to say things that we don't want. We're going to regret, we don't mean, and we're going to hurt each other even more.
So what you're trying to put a halt to, if only temporarily, is the kind of it's my way or the highway.
Absolutely.
So you've got to learn to see what the other person's perspective may be.
And when you're in conflict, because there's so much trigger, you're fully in your stuff. That's what we call it. You're in your stuff. You're triggered. You're in pain. You're in the conflict mode. And you have to be willing to just, it's like easing into it. So I always say, take a pause, take a time out. Gabriel and I, my husband and I, we had to practice this one many times over. And we just realized after so many hours of conflict and trying to get to the point of something, we're very strong. And so we keep fighting or keep arguing and trying to see each other's point. But neither one of us could hear, because we were so right in our thing. I was right in what I saw. He was right in what he saw. And we're trying to make each other see that. But from conflict, because of the constriction, you actually can't get resolution. So we both were like, we need to take a step away. You go in your corner, I'll go in my corner, and we take a deep breath. And what I do, one of the simplest things, whether you believe in meditation or not, it doesn't matter. Just connecting to your heart space, putting your hands on your heart, taking a couple deep breaths. Think about something in that moment that brings you joy or happiness or love. Could be butterflies, could be rainbows, could be your puppy, could be, I think about our daughter. She's just so beautiful and awesome. And I think about her, and all of a sudden my heart starts to calm a little bit. I still have the emotion. I still have the issues that are coming up, but I'm better able to communicate them than if I'm in that emotionally charged place. So you have to get to a place of calm. And then what I usually do is ask myself, what does this remind me of? What am I really upset about? What am I really feeling hurt about? And if you start asking and inner dialoguing with yourself, your mind knows exactly what you're upset about. You often feel unheard or not accepted or not valued, or you're doing too much and you feel like they're not doing enough. Those are the types of common things that come up for people. Sometimes they're bigger. But if you have that inner awareness and you can have a little chat with yourself, you can get to the root cause, step out of anger. Sometimes the sadness will come, and then you can really communicate what you're upset with. If I try to communicate to my husband when I'm angry, I'm just communicating all that past triggered stuff and he can't hear me and I'm not even clear on what I'm upset about. When I let myself just cool and calm for a second, the tears come and then I feel the sadness and then I'm like, I just feel like I'm not being seen. I feel like I'm not being heard. That I can communicate to him and I can then calmly come to him and say, babe, and I could be crying still, but I'm not angered. And that is more warmly accepted than the anger. And then I can say to him, hey, babe, you know what? I just feel like I'm not being heard. I feel like I'm not being listened to. I feel like you're not, what, and you can communicate however you need to. And he can hear that more so than if I come from anger or rage.
What about if you had the opposite situation? I have a really long fuse. I very rarely get angry. What I do is I retreat.
Yeah.
But then I often don't ever resolve what it is, where I feel I've been wronged. It's there somewhere, but I walk away.
Right.
And that isn't healthy either.
No.
And I know other people who do that too.
So in that regard, I would say it's still your responsibility. When there's a trigger, the trigger is with you. It seems like it's the other person. It seems like it's out there, but you're the one that's left with that feeling. They might not have any clue that they've upset you. They might not have any idea that they've hurt you. But we, the self, is left with that trigger. So it's important in that moment to still do that inner question. Take the time. If you don't have time in that moment, then at some point throughout that 24-hour period, I would take the time to go back within and say, okay, what am I really peeved about? What is this? What am I feeling? And give yourself the permission to feel what you feel and look at what's really there. And as you start to uncover that, you'll see that it reminds you of something from your past. You're like, this was just like that, or that was like that. There's a deeper issue. You'll start to see it lines up at patterns.
So then do you then go back to somebody a month later and say, you know what, I need to talk to you about something? I mean, usually the person knows, but I just retreat.
Right.
It's sort of being brought up in a generation of take the high road, right?
Right.
So
I think it depends on the situation. Like sometimes you can resolve those issues within yourself and have them be cleared. And you're like, you know what, it's not even worth it anymore because I've healed that within myself. Yeah. But other times if it's something where you're like, this is an integrity thing. This is something that's really important that this person knows how I'm feeling and what I'm moving through and what the impact of that was. But it's about finessing the way that you communicate it to say, you didn't do this. It's not about pointing the finger to be like, when you did this and you did that and whatever, because the person's right away going to feel defensive and be like, I didn't even know I did anything. Like, what happened? They're going to be sidewiped. But if you can say, hey, you know what? Back whenever, this is how I felt when this happened. Can we have a little discussion about that? Because I just want to let you know how I felt in that moment. And the person, most of the time, if you come from that space, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that upset you in that way. I'm so sorry. Then you can have a conversation of resolution. Mm-hmm.
What about when you're dealing with, I've often noticed relationship dynamics are quite different. My husband and I are both stubborn as mules, both firstborn children.
Yeah.
And then there are others in our family where like firstborn's married the firstborn, secondborn's married the second, the youngest married the youngest. Do you find different dynamics with those relationships?
100%, because how you are and how you deal with life, even you could look at astrology and how people are astrologically, our whole mechanism of who we are, they're two different, distinct, unique people trying to come together to make it work. There are going to be differences and there'll be similarities in how we deal with things. I'm firstborn too, so I totally get that one. Yeah.
So you need
headstrong.
Headstrong. And but with my husband and I, it's both basically it's like it's a big clash because we both have that to do. So all things to consider. So then to summarize, just give us some tips about taking the time out was first.
Take the time out. You got to just take a deep breath for a second. I like coming back to the breath because, again, conflict constricts. You need to open up again. So just use the breath. Just sit and breathe for a second or step outside. Take a deep breath. Put your hands to your heart. Think about a moment or something that brings you back into a state of, you might not be able to get to bliss and joy, but you might be able to get to, oh, I love the sound of the ocean. I really like being by the water. And all of a sudden you feel a sense of calm. When you get to calm, then you can come and communicate. But I would always say, take that extra step and ask yourself, what does this remind me of? What's really being triggered here? What am I really upset about? And as you dialogue with yourself, you'll uncover what's really underneath it all.
Where can people connect with you online?
My website is taraantler.com and then Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, as always, and we'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much.
Well, she said